Movie buff specialist Phil and John are back counting down our top 100 movies of all time. And today we are up to number 72, episode number 29. We're going to be talking about Heart of a Dog and The World's End, two movies that you probably haven't seen. Even The World's End somehow goes pretty unnoticed despite having Simon Pegg and Nick Frost and being the end of the sort of trilogy thing. Heart of a Dog, if you haven't seen that one, I'm not shocked. John just finds things. John's the guy who shows up at like a Walmart, looks in the $1 bin and somehow finds a gem and then will just keep it. And he just goes home and watches it 500 times and puts it as top 100 movie. So that's Heart of a Dog, man. I had to rent it for $1.99 and I was really confused when credits started playing halfway through. And then that's when I was like, oh, duh, it's a TV movie. It wasn't actually just a regular movie.
Yeah, I mean, that is kind of this throw off with Heart of the Dog because it is this TV movie. And it's the only TV movie we have on either of our lists. And it's, while watching it, if it weren't for those mid-credits, those credits midway through, you would have no idea that movie was made straight for TV.
Yeah, and you shouldn't know that movie was made straight for TV because a lot of TV movies in America are pretty bad, but they're starting to become better now that they're using like HBO and stuff like that. But in other countries, if you're making a TV movie, you're still trying to make it with some caliber because TV movies didn't have the same appeal that they did in America. So like America, a TV movie that's going to be on Hallmark or Lifetime or some shit like that, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like you kind of wave your hand at that and say, who cares? But in other countries, if they're going to do this might just be an alternative to putting something in theaters because movies, especially in Europe, they don't tend to make nearly as much money as they do in Asia or in America in movie theaters. And a lot of what it comes down to is just just selling tickets. You know, America will very much look at it, and Canada's kind of the same way, but Canada kind of falls in that middle ground of, hey, are we going to be able to make $10 million off of this movie? Whereas, you know, internationally might say, hey, can we sell 100 tickets to this? Like whatever it might be. That's obviously a really low ball, but that's why, you know, you get a Russian movie like this. It's just one of those things where it's like, okay, people might not go to the theater to see this, but we should still put everything we have into it so that people will watch it. And you could tell there was quite a bit of effort put into this one. And I guess this is where we should start because The World's End is at least English. And I guess has more than like 700 people who have seen it. Yeah. But yeah, let's start with Heart of a Dog from 1988, straight out of Russia.
Yeah. I mean, like we were saying, like this isn't a low budget TV movie. This is a Moss Films production. Like it is made by the main film production company in Russia. And to kind of get an idea of this story, because I mean, not many people know this story. It's based off of a novella by Mikhail Bulgakov, wrote in 1925. So we're talking about the height of the new economic plan, coming right off the Russian Civil War. And it's a time where people were very hypercritical of Bolshevism as it was rising in the Soviet Union. And this book, written in 1925, wasn't officially published until 1987.
Oh my God. Why is that, John?
It's counter-revolutionary. Yeah, it is very anti-Bolshevik. Yeah. And so it was published through Samizdat, which is small publishing circles, literally where someone will take the book, hand write a copy of it, and give it to someone else to do the same thing. That's how books were published in these underground circles during the Soviet Union. And Heart of the Dog is one of it, and it is the primary way that Bulgakov, who's now considered one of the greatest Russian authors of the 20th century, had his works published because they were very counter-revolutionary. They were very hypercritical of Bolshevism. So it's very interesting. And the fact of the matter is, as soon as this was published, they immediately made this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it was a year later. Actually, there was a movie called Heart of a Dog, and now I want to look it up because I swear there was one that came out in 1976 that is about Professor Preobrazhensky puts courageous experience trying to turn a dog in equal to all of the person. As a result, somebody turns out doggies. Unfortunately, experience proves that it is better for dog to remain a dog, whatever that is. But it was based on the Bulgakov book at the time, and Max von Sydow was actually in it. So this came out in 1976. Nobody saw it, but you're saying that this was before the book actually was published, and this was just because it was the underground thing?
Its first official English publishing and Russian publishing was in 1986. But yeah, Bulgakov was incredibly popular still. But like, you couldn't officially say it because it was against the Soviet Union. It's like how Dr. Zhivago and Pasternak won the Nobel Prize for Literature for it, but he couldn't accept it because it was published outside of Russia.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Because while I'm watching this movie, I liked it. I thought it was a little long, but that's just mainly because it's a lot of talking. And it's one thing, like, I love foreign movies. It's hard for me when I'm like, there's so much dialogue in this movie that I felt like I wasn't watching the movie. And that can be a little exhausting because as I'm sitting there just like staring at the bottom, like, what are they doing? Like, I was having a hard time balancing that. I feel like normally I can balance that pretty well. And like, I read pretty quickly. So normally I can like get through it. Okay, what's going on in the scene? Get through what's going on in the scene, all that. But I felt like I was having a harder time in this one. And I don't know if that was just because also, like, on Amazon Prime, the captioning is atrocious. Amazon Prime should be ashamed of themselves. It's absolutely hideous. There's no capital S's throughout the entire time. So the entire time
that's actually just because I didn't watch it on Amazon Prime, and my captions were the same way.
Really? Because it says his name is Harik. I'm like, his name isn't Harik.
No.
And it was confusing with the he's and she's, and it took me a second to get into that. So maybe not necessarily the fault of the filmmakers, but it was just a lot of like staring at words instead of really watching the movie. But there's nothing subtle about this movie, and I think I don't think it's meant to be subtle, and I think that's what works for it ultimately, is that it is very in your face with, I am anti this. I do not like this. I do not like the Bolshevik Revolution. I do not like the fact that they have taken over power. I don't like any of that stuff. And it is so in your face the entire time. And this professor is a really good one. And the part that really got me, and this is something that, like, you know, I think about all the time because, you know, when you're in a heated political climate, you're always thinking to yourself, okay, what are the benefits and what are the negatives to this heated political climate? But the one that really got me was when he said, where did Karl Marx write that you can't have a carpet in the hallway? And I thought that was so interesting because it is it's like, okay, yeah, there's certain aspects of everything that you might say, okay, let's go with this or let's go with that. But there's other aspects where it's like, I just don't understand why it must look bad. Why can't it look somewhat nice? And I thought that was a really interesting little like opinion, just a little side note there of, why can't we have a carpet? Why does it have to just be like hideous and ugly? Why can't it look nice? And this professor trying to get through that. And also, John, and I know you didn't mention this, but at the time, this was also kind of an answer to the Russian government was really focused on eugenics, right?
Yeah. There is a lot of eugenics at this point, and it's that time period. There were a lot of Russian scientists who were working on eugenics at that point and trying to perfect it. It's the same time when the Germans were really focused on eugenics, so it makes sense. It was kind of just that like first half of the 20th century, eugenics did become this big thing. And you'll keep in mind that the intention of this experiment was not to turn this dog into a human.
Yeah.
The intention was to check out the regenerative properties of the pituitary gland and testicles when attached to a dog.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely very hypercritical of eugenics.
Yeah. And like, so all of that is just to say that I love that we have this professor and we have his doctor friend where this professor is. So I like how complicated he is because one, he's very anti this movement of Marxism and all of that. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He doesn't want these people who are showing up at his house saying, you have to give away this. You have too many rooms, blah, blah, blah. Get out of here. This is my room. I'm going to eat where you're supposed to eat. I don't need any of that. But then at the same time, he brings the doctor in to live with him illegally under everybody's noses. So he believes in this, maybe perhaps a little bit more than he necessarily thinks, but he doesn't believe in it to the extreme. He just believes kind of, I guess you could say, in helping people. But he also believes in, okay, what can we create? And I love that the two of them end up creating this monster who's everything they didn't want to create. and how this dog is kind of going against what it is that the dog was like. The dog is kind of is falling into line with those who weren't treating him well. And so it's this really interesting, like, back and forth, and it kind of keeps you confused throughout, and also because it's a novel, not so much a movie, for part of it, in my opinion. But go ahead, John.
Yeah, and I mean, when you start watching this movie, how long did it take you to realize the narrator was the dog?
Not too long, but I think that it was kind of like a cheat, because I was thinking like, okay, we're definitely from a point of view here, because it starts moving, and I was like, okay, this is a dog. It didn't take me too long.
Yeah, but I'm glad you mentioned the moving, because like the camera angles at the beginning of this film, when we are in the dog perspective, are all lower. Yeah, and it's very interesting, because it again, it's where the high quality of this film kind of comes into, is the fact that it's a very well thought out film when it comes to its camera angles and everything. And as our main character becomes more of a man, the camera angle does actually raise in the film.
Yeah, and because this is his movie, like he said, it's it's the movie is called Heart of a Dog, and it's because that has multiple reasons. One of the, he still has the heart of a dog, but the heart of a dog is to kind of follow whoever's being nice to a dog. And who's being nice to the dog? Well, the other people, the people who are the house management system, or whatever the hell they're called. They're the ones who are being nice. So it's got all these different meanings, but it ultimately is being told from that point of view. And it's like you're observing how everybody else is acting from that dog's point of view. That doesn't mean that we don't get plenty from the professor's point of view, but the professor is the B character in this movie. The A character is certainly the dog.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where a lot of the critique of Bolshevism comes into, because obviously Bulgakov showing that the dog is inherently drawn to Bolshevism is kind of talking about the simplicity and animalistic nature of Bolshevism. And it's echoed by the professor when he does, in fact, say, you are arguing general pluralities with two university-educated men. And you think you know this better, how things work better. Yeah. When you're saying like all of these ideals, these fantastic ideals of everything should be shared equally, but you don't have a solution for it.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like so much of our discussion throughout this movie podcast has been based in politics, but most good movies come from politics, and because most good stories come from the frustration of politics. When you're 100% happy, you're not necessarily making great movies. You know what I mean? Like, some of the best movies ever come out of Vietnam. They come out of World War II. They come out of they're coming out now. Like, but it's when there's an unhappiness, when there's an uneasiness, and so it ends up being this political thing. But I think that's the big complaint with most politics in general for the entirety of time, is you have all these great ideals, but what's your solution? Because everybody has that ideal. Everybody wants, at the end of the day, if you can hearken in on what does the professor want, what does the doctor want, what do the house management people want, what does this dog want, every one of them wants the same thing. They want their own piece of the pie, and they want to be happy. They want to be able to live their lives with and eat and sleep and have whatever. They all just want it in very different ways. Now, which way is the best way? Who knows? That's what we've been trying to figure out as human civilization for thousands and thousands of years. But when there are these seemingly quick, easy solutions, such as when we watch The Godfather Part 2, it's not always a quick, easy solution. Look how cool it was to turn this dog into a human. Now, all of a sudden, it's a human, though. That's not a good thing. What's going on here, and what is happening? What is this dog not understanding, or what is this dog trying to do that a normal human wouldn't be trying to do? There's so many layers when you start to dive into that. And I say this every week, but when something can still be relevant 30 years after it was made, but also 100 years after it was written, there's something to be said for that. It's a lot of beating your head against the wall and pretending that everything is going to turn out all right. Why hasn't it turned out all right then? I think that's kind of what Bulgakov is trying to say in this, is like, if this is all going to work, if we can just start doing eugenics and blah, 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 and whatever, then let's do it. Let's do it. But you got to convince me that my way of life, living in this 7-bedroom, whatever, being a doctor, is worth giving up to go that other route. You got to give me something to believe in. That seems to be kind of what the purpose of this is.
Yeah, and the timing of when it is written is very important as well. Because like I said, it is kind of at the height of the new economic plan, which was kind of this switch in mentality in the early Soviet Union, where they kind of laxed off a lot of the Bolshevik philosophy and kind of let the remnants of the Mensheviks and the bourgeoisie kind of gain a little more power again. And so it's really relevant here because we're 3 years away from Stalin taking over. And that changes everything at that point. So in that case, you don't have the professor having this written exemption from the having to split up his apartment. Because you did have those communal apartments where you did have like 4 or 5 families living together in an apartment of that size. If not just a full 7 and like a family in every room, right? So it's very interesting this time period that this is occurring and how it does kind of have this optimism of we can work to help humanity here. But in the end, both the eugenics and the Bolshevism fail to do so.
Yeah. And I think, that's exactly it. And like, it gets in this whole thing, like you did with Ex Machina, was that last week or 2 weeks ago, of this whole, what does it actually mean to be human? By becoming a human, are you now a human? Has this doctor helped this dog in any way, shape, or form? Gave him a roof over his head, but now he doesn't want to give him a roof over his head anymore because now he's starting to talk back. And so has this doctor actually helped? And has what this doctor done helped? Even though it's cool and it's crazy and you're like, wow, like we just turned a dog into a person. What's next? Well, what's next is that what you want taking over? We'll get to this like when we get to Planet of the Apes, which I have, I think, at 21 or 22 on my list. That's very similar. I mean, not that the apes were created that way. It was just that over time they evolved. And that movie skips over all that part. It just talks about it. But that's the interesting thing with this is like, okay, like we're watching this happen. So what is actually better? And there's so many like high class, high society conversations in this movie that may come across as pretentious and may come across as too on the nose. But this guy, again, he's not trying to be subtle because sometimes you can't be subtle in order to win. You can't sit there and say, oh, well, let's use this allegory. Sometimes you have to just hit them over the head. And this is definitely hitting you over the head, but at a time when, even though you're hitting people over the head, they're still not listening.
And Bulgakov was always like that with all of his writing. I mean, he has a book where a short story where a scientist is experimenting with eggs, and he finds this special red light that shines on them, and it turns them into giant monsters.
Nice.
Like, he's not subtle with his allegories at all. So when you take that and you translate it to film, and we get to see this transition of Polygrafovich, which is also in
or
itself,
Telegrafovich.
Yes, which actually in itself is also kind of a jab at Bolshevism because at the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, afterwards, people really wanted to kind of, there was a trend of renaming yourself in these non-conventional ways to like shed the bourgeoisie attitude and stuff like that. But we get to see him develop, and we get this like terrifying visual of him as like this half man, half dog.
Yeah.
And like his tail's falling off and stuff like that. And then he becomes the full man, and then it becomes full circle at the end. And at the end, the dog's kind of just happy to be a dog again.
Yeah. The dog at the end, I don't know what happened. They cut me open, but who cares? I'm happy where I am. And I think that sometimes, and I think, with that ending, I think what this movie is trying to say is sometimes you think you want something very, very different. And then you get that very, very different thing and realize, Nope, don't want that. Change my mind. Want to go back. But now, how do you go back? This movie gives the option for this dog to go back. This movie presents the dog, but gives the scientists a way to bring the dog back to being a dog. Sometimes you miss what was good about life in the first place because, it's just, people are always going to want to change. And that's the thing too. I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution happens, all of that happens, and it's people wanted to change then. People wanted to go back. I mean, Godfather 2, Cuba, everything happens in Cuba. People in Cuba have been fighting against that for years now. Like it's one of those things where you're never going to be settled completely in where you are. But this kind of gives that look into Oz of, well, what else could I do? What else could my life be like? Maybe I'll just stick over here with the simple life of a dog where I just, I'm fed and I'm housed and that's it. And I don't make my entire life about this. Like that seems to be what the message. This movie is like it's counter-revolutionary. And while it's trying to be revolutionary because it's against what the government is at the time, it's also very anti-revolutionary. Because it really is saying, like, don't start a revolution. It's very interesting, all of the layers that are like contradicting in this story, but they're not actually contradicting.
Yeah, like the fact that our professor character abuses this party system with his high-ranking official who can intercept the reports of him doing a bunch of illegal stuff.
Yeah.
And like that again is a criticism of how the Soviet Union was run. Mm-hmm. Because people who had connections benefited greatly from it until Stalin came around and decided to kill everyone with connections. Mm-hmm. But it's this huge aspect of this film, and it's this small little throwaway. We see it at the beginning of the film when he makes the phone call, and we see it at the end of the film when he's presented with the letter for the report, and that's it. Mm-hmm. But it's so substantial to everything that happens because it motivates everything moving forward. It gives us our introduction to the housing committee at the beginning, and like we kind of get an idea of where their power lies, that there is a cap to it, and they can't just force their way into things when it comes to forcing the professor to give up 2 rooms. And at the end of the movie, we see that it gives the professor enough motivation to reverse the treatment on Polygraphovich.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean... Polygraphovich, yes. And I was always confused when I watched The Americans. I was like, okay, he's Arkady Ivanovich, but nobody calls him Ivanovich. His name's not actually Ivanovich. I never understood that aspect of like Russian culture. And then in this movie, they actually do kind of explain it a little bit. So I kind of got a better idea. But yeah, so I struggle to even like respond to everything you just said because like I have a hard time even like I have like a hard time even wrapping my mind around it to the point of like, I don't want to say anything that's going to end up getting me in trouble. I remember the one week I said, John, let's not make any grand statements. And I came out and said, America was racist in 2001. And it was like the first thing I said. And I'm like, oh, well done, Phil. But I don't really know what to say to that. Other than like, yeah, like that's something that always happens. And I think that's why the proletariat or the lower class always feels disdain for the upper class, for those who are really wealthy, is because they have what the lower class doesn't. And therefore they want to try to overthrow the upper class. But a lot of times, and I'm not going to make a statement about go do this or go do that. I don't care. But a lot of times when these types of revolutions or something happen, it actually creates a bigger divide. Because as we see when Stalin comes to power, then what? You know what I mean? Then what do you do? Now there's nothing that you can do to bring yourself up. Now there's just more people down there at the bottom with you. But all of these things of we're going to overthrow anybody at the top. Human nature is always to move your way up. You'll always find a way to move. It feels to me like you'll always find a way to move your way up. And so in this movie, while Philip Filipovich, because I cannot say his other name, Professor is trying to he's trying to stay where he is, and they're trying to overthrow him. He's still being notified ahead of time of everything. So even if they were to overthrow him, he'd still probably be able to, he would try to continue to work his way above whatever it is that they're trying to get. And are his connections good enough? We see in a movie like Burnt by the Sun, doesn't matter who your connections are, that you're probably going to end up getting killed anyway. But there are certain people who will just continue to keep moving their way up.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a very big... It's so relevant to the history of the Soviet Union. And this is how things worked, right? Where, yes, we did have the overthrowing of the Tsar and the royal family in the Bolshevik Revolution. Mm-hmm. But the leaders of the Bolshevik Revolution then were granted and received power. And then they started rising to power. And Lenin did his thing, tried to balance everything, introduced the new economic policy. Then after his death in 1924, there was a lot of humming about who's going to take over now that Lenin's gone, because he was kind of this ideal hero of the revolution, leader that they could follow. And then you had Trotsky and Stalin as your kind of two options there. And in this movie, we see the Housing Committee praising Trotsky, right? That's part of this movie. And then, of course, anyone who knows about history knows that Trotsky ends up with an ice pick in his neck in Mexico because Stalin kills him, or gets him killed, and then takes the power himself. And that's kind of the biggest critique when it comes to communism as a whole, is that, yes, people want to inherently work for the betterment of mankind, but the problem is that there's this deep, dark, some people believe it's a natural tendency for greed and power and wanting to rise up through it. And it's kind of a confirmation bias based on what we've seen through history. But that's what our history with communism is that these socialist states turn into dictatorships because there is always at least one person who gets the power and then doesn't want to relinquish it.
Well, we're on episode 29 of this podcast. We've talked about The Godfather Part 2. We've talked about Reign of Terror. We talked about this movie. I'm sure there's other ones that I'm just missing. I mean, we're about to talk about The World's End, which might not seem like it's in relation to this, but that's a very anti-communist movie too. And so when you start to look at some of the movies that we've watched, we're 29 episodes in and we've talked about it pretty much 3 weeks. It's not hard to find these movies, like you said, that are going with that confirmation bias, but also just being didn't work. Don't go that route. And so, it's until it's proven that somebody with an actual, with the willingness to move up, get there and say the Robespierre, not then be I'm now going to kill all my friends. I mean, when does that happen? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it is these are the types of complaints that Bulgakov's just levying at Bolshevism at this point. And this was before it got really bad.
Yeah. And I always like movies that'll look at the before it got really bad or an alternate reality of it getting really bad or something like that. Burnt by the Sun is also about before it gets really bad. They don't think it's actually going to be that bad. And Burnt by the Sun has almost the exact same conversations that Reign of Terror has, which almost has the exact same conversations that this movie has. That's pretty wild how similar all of those conversations are. And then you have a movie like The Godfather Part 2, which is looking into Castro coming to power and how does Che Guevara die? Castro's right-hand man, and how does Che Guevara die? You know what I mean? It's all so cyclical. So that's why, of course, people are going to be fearful of this kind of thing as you start to move away from it. But a movie like this one that is doing it by making a dog into a human, it's such an interesting high concept. It kind of blows my mind that this movie hasn't been remade. It really does. I'm surprised America hasn't taken this and made it. And not for nothing, a lot of these right-wing media that are trying to get into film or something like that, it's a perfect movie to sit down and say, great, we're going to remake a classic. It's going to have our political message. And it's going to kind of prove what our point is. It's why are you not making that? Why are you trying to go with original content that is overblown and way too much. You know,
Well,
like I don't know.
This has been adapted quite a few times for like stage productions,
okay,
and operas and musicals.
Makes sense.
But it has not been remade as a film, as far as I know, in like Western society. It is very interesting that like something like this, which does have this very interesting story and kind of falls in line with the philosophical ideology of the West, that, you know, communism bad, this is why communism bad. It's really interesting that a story that's so revered, it was literally an instant classic upon publication in 87, hasn't been touched by Hollywood at all.
Yeah. Surprises me. But who knows? You got anything else on this movie, or should we move?
There's one sequence of scenes that we haven't really discussed, and that is the woman in the movie theater.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of it's this one weird part in the story, but it kind of shows movies as escapism, which is really nice. And it's something that doesn't really happen as much, but it's so interesting. And then the fact that it also motivates one of the characters later because he's a creepy stalker. It's just so fascinating that this scene that kind of seems throwaway because it's just like the dog observing this woman, but then you realize how crucial that woman is to the climax of this film.
Yeah. And the thing is too, like, I always feel like directors will do this in these really dark times, or they'll take kind of like your innocence and they'll try to give hope to that. It's very much what Spielberg does with the girl in the red the red jacket in Schindler's List. Like, it's giving you that innocence of like something to pay attention to, something else, something that in all these dark times, as somebody who still goes to a movie theater and laughs. You know what I mean? Yeah. Somebody who's nice to the dog beforehand. Now the dog's going to go and pretty much make her life a living hell if he has his way. Like, it's one of those things of somebody holding on to something, holding on to that pre-Bolshevik time period, or holding on to that pre-Nazi era. Like, there's something to be said for those. And very rarely do those types of characters ever make it out okay. They generally make it out bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I thought those were very, very good scenes. Those were probably the most artistic scenes of the movie, in my opinion. The rest was, like I said, very talky, very stagey. And I understand why so many staged adaptations of this movie have been made.
Yeah.
All right. John, what was the best movie you watched this week?
I finally had the ability to watch the final movie in the rebuild of Evangelion series. I have been waiting for this movie for years. It was delayed because of COVID and didn't get released until March of this past year, but that was only in theaters in Japan, and they were very, very stingy about like copyright and everything. But Amazon Prime finally got it. I watched it. I have End of Evangelion incredibly high on my top 100, and it's incredible that Hideaki Anno can make 3 perfect conclusions for the same series.
Yeah. I started watching Evangelion just so that I could prepare, and luckily John does have it at like number 20 or something, so I have like a whole year pretty much to get through that series and watch it. I'm trying not to go too fast so that I actually have it fresh in my mind. Not my genre for sure, so I'm curious to see how I'm going to like it as it continues on, because so far I'm like, anime. Like, that's what I'm getting. But yeah, weird that it's on Amazon and not on Netflix, but I guess you're in Canada, so that might be different. But everything is on Netflix.
No, it's all on Amazon.
Oh, so everything down here is on Netflix.
So this is a different series, so the rights were different.
Okay.
So it's not like, the original series and the original movies are on Netflix, but the rebuild series are all on Amazon for some reason.
Got it. All right.
Well, we're talking, like, this was a big deal. Like, when it released in Japan, like, it was by far the largest box office earner through all of COVID.
Oh, I would imagine. I mean, there's a reason why these series have been going on for 20 something years now. Yeah.
And I mean, this was a movie 8 years in the waiting. There was a lot of fans of Evangelion who did not think this movie was ever going to be made.
Well, I didn't watch too much this week. The best I got a feature and a short. I watched a short. I rewatched short film Curfew. If you haven't seen Curfew, check out Curfew. It won the Oscar back in 2012, I believe, or 2013, whatever Oscar year that was. Great short film. It's only 19 minutes. It's on Canopy. It's so good. Sean Christensen, I don't think he's ever done anything else. He did because it was something Before I Disappear, which was the movie that he turned that short into a feature, got bad reviews, pretty much because this is like a perfect short. So if you get a chance to watch that, I don't really review the shorts on Letterboxd, but I feel like I had to do that one. But for feature, I'd go The Circus, which is Charlie Chaplin movie. I finally got around to watching that. I love watching Chaplin movies, and this one was really, to me, like the most of its time. I felt like it was just like, hey, this is a silent movie that has a guy doing silly silent things, and like very entertaining, very warm, like very heartfelt. But like the little tramp character, it's amazing how much Chaplin was able to get out of this one character with the circus and city lights and the kid and all these modern times. Like he just keeps going and going and going and going. It's pretty unbelievable what he was able to get and how he was able to kind of show the differences in society, how he would just stumble into these situations of wealth despite being so incredibly poor and always end up coming out looking better on the other side. So The Circus is definitely worth it. It's only an hour and 12 minutes. It was on HBO Max. So it was a quick watch. It was a good one. And if you're not really into silent films, but you want to try them out, that's a good one to try out. Very funny movie and very entertaining. So that was mine for this week. Speaking of funny and entertaining, John texted me immediately after the Watching the World's End and said, Phil, I can't wait to figure out how this ended up in your top 100. This is without a doubt the outlier in my top 100. This is the movie that is it's very over there while everything else is over here. And yet I think it has pretty much all of the exact same themes that so many movies in my list have. The World's End hit me at the perfect time in my life. The first Friday night of my senior year of college, me and my friends went to the AMC and watched this movie. And I remember sitting there up until the slashed wrist scene when we find that out. And I remember sitting there and going, I connect way too much with this character. I just want to have a good time. I just want to drink with my friends. And I am terrified of what is coming next. And I love the way that this movie is 5 different things at one time. I love that it is a focused, unfocused, sloppy mess that somehow manages to tie it all together. And I think it does so absolutely perfectly. Edgar Wright is phenomenal. John's got him all over his top 100 list. I don't, but I love so many of his movies. This is my favorite one. And the reason why is because Simon Pegg's character in this movie is just one of the realest characters I've seen in a movie in years. It just feels so authentic. That type of person who just is living in the past, cannot let go, doesn't give a damn about anything, and doesn't know what to do with themselves. I feel like it's such a phenomenal character, and the way that he handles everything covers it all up with this wicked, dark sense of humor, with this desire to not be anything else. The way he gets Andy to come along is to lie about his mother dying. Like this despicable human being. Yet it all feels so real, and Edgar Wright toes the line so perfectly of making you still root for this scumbag by the end of the movie. Like, it just nails it across the board. I think it's one of the most entertaining movies ever made. The dialogue is lightning fast. You miss half the jokes because he just keeps going. Edgar Wright is a phenomenal action director. He is so good with that. Everything that he directs has a rhythm. I think so many people, they'll get bogged down in this Marvel DC BS. There's no rhythm to that. It's just bam, 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 beat the crap. There's a rhythm. It's like artistry. There's a dance to when Edgar Wright makes an action scene. The scene in the bathroom is artistic. It is, that is like a ballet playing out just set to people having their arms ripped off. It's ridiculous. I love his direction. I love the acting. I love the story. And I love that at the end of the day, a stupid friggin' lamp is trying to control the human race, but they're going to fuck it up any way they want to. And I just love it. I love everything about this movie. Such an incredible movie. John, I know you like Edgar Wright, but you hadn't seen it.
I hadn't. And I mean, you mentioned it already. It's kind of like this outlier for the Cornetto trilogy as a whole. and just Edgar Wright as a whole, where it was Edgar Wright became really popular after Shaun of the Dead, and then Hot Fuzz came out, and then he kind of took a break for a while, and I guess he made Paul at one point, and then and everyone was like, "Oh, this is the end of the Cornetto trilogy." Mm-hmm. And then there's like, no, it's not. That one's coming. And then The World's End comes out, and I just never got around to seeing it. Mm-hmm. And like, I do enjoy Edgar Wright quite a lot. I think he's a phenomenal director. I think he really understands film, and he really knows how to translate that into a film, and that is seen throughout the Cornetto trilogy. Like, he mm-hmm. understands genres, and he understands how to implement them while still satirizing them. Mm-hmm. It's one of his greatest talents. And it's funny that you mentioned that like the fight scenes in this are so well choreographed and are beat for beat, and like we don't get that in Marvel and DC movies because we were supposed to. Mm-hmm. Edgar Wright was supposed to direct Ant-Man, and Kevin Feige still says that it was the best Marvel movie they never made mm-hmm. because of creative differences between Wright and Marvel. And then this movie, you're right, it's so realistic. It's the most realistic mm-hmm. of the Cornetto trilogy, despite the fact that it's an invasion movie.
Yeah. Well, because you don't realize it's an invasion movie until halfway through, maybe even further than that. I went into this movie and knew nothing about it. I didn't realize it was the end of the Cornetto trilogy. We just sat down. It had good reviews. We would go to AMC. It was right around the corner from University of Miami's campus. We would go every weekend. And so we were back in school. It was like, hey, let's go see this one. That's what's out. Let's go. And we went, and it was like, I didn't know what I was getting into. And that scene, I was like, wait, is this an alien movie? What the hell am I watching? But it never, even like you said, it's the most realistic. Hot Fuzz should be the most realistic of this trilogy, and yet it's not. And I think that's what I respect so much about this movie is satirizing a cop genre, The Village, M. Night Shyamalan type thing. That's not hard to do. It's not. It's just simply not. Satirizing the zombie genre, everybody has now done it. Yeah, Shaun of the Dead kind of, set the tone with that. But Zombieland and Zombieland 2 and whatever else you want to talk about. Satirizing this is not easy to do. We've seen a lot of people try and a lot of people fail. Eight-Legged Freaks is kind of similar, but it's a B movie with the spiders and whatever. But you have these movies that try to satirize this. What I love about this movie is there's no satire to it until halfway through. Up until then, it's just a bunch of guys going out and getting drunk in their town, and everybody's a loser now because when you leave your hometown and go back for the first time in 20 years, it's going to seem a lot lamer than it was when you grew up there. It's just going to seem way worse, and you're going to be really disappointed that most people don't remember who the hell you are.
Yeah, and especially when you're a person like Gary, and like we all know a Gary. Mm-hmm. We all know that person who's trying to relive the glory days. Mm-hmm. And to see him just so adamant about doing it's almost like you almost feel compelled to do it with him. Mm-hmm. And then you're just wondering, well, why is everyone so... What happened in that time period that is preventing people from jumping on board? Mm-hmm. Because he had to work each of these individuals in order to get them to come along.
Well, and not for nothing. I mean, now they all have their lives. Some are married, some aren't married. Andy clearly wants nothing to do with them because Andy almost died because of him. Like, you have all of these life, life just keeps moving on. It's going to be hard. Same thing. Oh yeah, let's go get drunk with whoever your friends are, whatever it is. It's never going to be the same as when you were 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24 years old. It's just never going to be the same thing. And that's what this movie is really dwelling on. And I can say 19 in this movie because it's set in the UK, but because us Americans, John, I don't know what it is in Canada. Canada, it's 18, right? But in us Americans, I don't want to get in trouble with YouTube.
Some parts of Canada is 18. Some is 19.
Montreal, I know I was allowed to drink when I went there. But anyway, the whole thing is it's never going to be the same. And so you're trying to relive the past. This guy, whatever his name is working as a real estate. Oh man, he's working with the real estate. The other guy, he's dating a fitness instructor. The other person is working for his dad at a car dealership. Mm-hmm. And here's Andy doing what he's doing. They all have grown up. And I think what this movie does a really good job of is saying everybody always, I mean, how many times as a kid do you hear, oh, well, you're going to have to work for a living and you're going to have to do this, you have to do that, blah, 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 blah. And again, this kind of goes into the heart of a dog thing, which is funny, but this movie is very much about a guy who doesn't want to have to work for what he gets, but also doesn't want to be told what to do. So he kind of has the same ideas of some of these people who are like, yeah, well, this is easier because we don't have to work. We're just like kind of taken care of. But he still wants his humanity. He wants his individuality. And like this movie does such a good job when they're sitting there and like, look at you, you're pathetic. He's like, how am I pathetic? Look at all of you. You sit there in your collared shirts and your button downs and all that. How is this any better than what I'm doing? Why? Because you get paid to do it? Who cares? And it does such a good job with that. And just as they're all coming to terms with hating each other and they're going to blow the whole thing off, now it turns out that these are blanks. These are, in fact, aliens, and they have been infiltrated. And so now you have to work together because these people who seem like they have it all together actually don't have anything together. They've just been taken over.
Yeah, and that is one of the really interesting things about this movie and how it does work really well is that we get to the point of complete acceptance that these friends can no longer be friends. They have nothing in common. Mm-hmm. They just don't get along with each other. And then we have that inciting incident in which all of a sudden, oh, there are these aliens here. What are we going to do? Mm-hmm. And how do we deal with it? And then their conclusion is, we got to finish the pub crawl because that's what we're doing anyways.
Yeah. And it's good because, that might make the most sense, but it's also such drunken thinking because now Andy's getting drunk too. Mm-hmm. And it is just that drunk way of thinking of like, well, they all think that we're doing this. We might as well just keep doing it. Like we might as well just go. They're not thinking clearly. It's very drunk and it's just follow the path. And I love that they're just going from bar to bar and everybody's looking at them a little bit more and just drinking. It's like a great montage of them going through all of them. But then you end up with Pierce Brosnan coming in and talking and giving the whole lowdown and whatever it is. So many great and that fight scene is my favorite one in the entire movie. That bar fight scene, the Pierce Brosnan one where they fight everybody and Simon Pegg is just trying to drink his beer and he can't get it because every time he gets bumped and he's just like, you gotta be kidding. It's so much fun. Mm-hmm. It's so much fun. And it really is taking on a serious issue that people have, which is growing up, which is moving on, which is, being so stuck in the past that now you're suicidal, you're a drug addict, you're all these things. But also, like, as we were talking about with Heart of a Dog, like this overreach, this governmental overreach of we're going to make everything so clean and so pristine and so perfect that now you've lost this Gary King. You need the Gary Kings of the world in order for everything else to function the way that it's functioning. And Gary King is the perfect person to go out there and do whatever he has to do. Because he doesn't care. As long as he's having a really good time, that's all he wants to do. And why shouldn't his life just be a really good time?
And that's really what the overarching theme of this movie is that like living isn't this perfect society. It isn't this fact that like everyone's getting along and everything. Like you want the ability to do the messy things. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we see that come out in the climax when they're like confronting the leader of the blanks and everything. And Gary tells us straight up, he's like, I just want to be able to do stuff. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. We're the human race, and you can't. Mm-hmm. We're gonna mess it up anyway. We will. I mean, that whole speech at the end there is just so like it's so significant because it's just that's like every time that we try to get these people. Oh, we're gonna make everything perfect, and we're gonna do this, and we're gonna do that. We're gonna do this. That's just not how things work. This idealistic, over the top thing. All these blanks, but now you have the guy from Harry Potter whose name I can never remember, who's walking around terrified that they're going to end up turning him into one of those things. And now he's like, so yeah, he's living in this pristine world and he's accepted it and he's just going to go along with it and blah blah blah. But now he's under the watchful eye, and the one moment he slips up, he's done. Do you really want to be living under that fear your entire life? No. You'd rather just live in the sloppy, gross dive bars, and instead of, these bars that are all the same thing and all they have is a Crown and Crown and Royal or Royal and Crown or something like that. It's like it's pretty much Crown Royal, and it's the Foster's logo, which really cracks me up. But it's very much that, and it's just there's no individuality to any of it. And how do you keep the individuals? Because as much as they all can't stand Gary King because he's such a tool, he's an individual. They're turning into those robots. His 4 friends are turning into the robots until he helps them to be like, maybe we shouldn't turn into the robots. We should fight against this. And it leads to pretty ridiculous moments throughout the entire thing. And that's what I always love about Edgar Wright is he'll keep it real, but then he'll keep it ridiculous too.
I also like how he foreshadows who's going to become a blank.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. I'll let you go ahead.
Because Oliver and Peter are definitely dressed in blue the entire movie. And there's a scene where they're talking about the 3 Musketeers, and he goes, why don't they just make it the 5 Musketeers? This way they can kill off 2 of them and still have the 3 Musketeers. Yeah.
And that's literally what this movie is. But yeah, Oliver and Peter, that's what they're, O-Man and Peter. Yeah, they're dressed in blue the entire time. And they're the only ones who actually have family members in this movie that we see. Which is kind of another interesting little tidbit because we see Peter's dad and then we see her we see his sister, O-Man's sister, who Rosamund Pike is phenomenal.
Oh, so great in this movie.
Love her. Love the line of "We'll always have the disabled." What a riff on Casablanca. It doesn't get much better than that.
I also love the fact that she ends up with Steven in the end rather than Gary. Like it feels. Because it doesn't feel like Gary should win. And in the end, he doesn't. He still kind of rejects this idea of moving on. And we see that in the epilogue where he's there with the blanks of his younger friends.
Yeah.
It's like, because you're in the climax and like the blanks offer him the opportunity to, go back to the glory days. And he rejects it and he feels so great. And then he just gets there anyways. It's like, yeah, of course he does.
Well, of course he does. And at the end of the day, for him to get the girl would be a waste because he's not going to stay with the girl. For him, it's about getting the boys back together. He needs to have his posse. He needs to have his group of 5. He needs to be going through that. That's what it is for him. That's what he needs. Steven needed the girl. And like they have that moment, with the cabin. It's actually quite nice. Yeah, they were going to be way better for each other than Gary was ever going to be for her. So, yeah, he needs to just go and have the boys because that's what he's after the entire movie. He gets everything he's looking for. He's now going to have a good time. He's got the people around him who are going to follow him no matter what happens because they just have to. And he's going rogue. Like, he's not going to be tied down by anything. It's interesting because, yeah, he might not win, but really for Gary King, he wins. He gets everything that Gary King wanted.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that they decided to end the movie that way with like this like post-apocalyptic, everything went down because the network was there then like essentially created technology on Earth and was the reason why we had that massive techno advance through the 90s and everything. Very interesting because it feels like our heroes don't win in the end still.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's how a lot of this trilogy is. I forget how Hot Fuzz ends. I haven't seen Hot Fuzz in a long time.
It's been a while.
But I know with Shaun of the Dead, it ends with Nick Frost like as a zombie.
Yeah.
And so it's still like one of those things like, yeah, he's your friend and he's your buddy, but he's a zombie. Like all of these movies kind of have that feeling of, yeah, the apocalypse still happened, but how are you going to continue on with your life now that something bad has happened? And yes, like none of these movies are like, great. Now there is no more zombie. There is no more alien. There is no more whatever it is in Hot Fuzz, like just cult. There is no more of that. So it really does get away. It never gives you the easy answer, but at the same time, it's these people making the best of their situation because I think, again, the message of this movie is the individuality is more important than what you're living in. Like living in a post-apocalyptic world is easier to swallow if you have your individuality than living in this pristine world where you're a robot who literally is not allowed or doesn't think for themselves. I think that's what the message of this movie is. And so, when Gary King is yelling at the lamp, as he calls it, like there's so much passion to that the lamp it's never been confronted like that. I don't know what to say to this. This is something I've never had to take on before. And so it just gives up. Screw it. We're out of here. We're going somewhere else. Earth's uninhabitable. Why should the rest of the solar system have to coexist with a planet like yours? Because they have to. Like, that's why. Because they have to. And you know what? Like, if it's not good enough here, too bad. Because that's how we are. And like, I don't know. I love that message. I think it's a great, like, be what you are, do what you got to do kind of movie. And that's why I connect with this one more than Hot Fuzz and more than Shaun of the Dead, and why it just resonates with me 8 years later so much. It was in a week, it'll be 8 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does have that aspect of it. And a lot of the time we do kind of forget the individual. Sometimes we embrace the individuality too much, but a lot of the time we're still kind of feeling like we don't have, or like we're part of a collective, and we're just a small part of something big, and we can't really do anything because of it. And this movie really is just about embracing your individuality and living because of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's got some of the best one-liners. I love the one-liners in this movie. I love the WTF joke that just runs throughout the entire thing. I love like I said, I already said, I love the "we'll always have the disabled" line. I love how he follows Sam into the bathroom the first time that they see each other, and he just laughs because he can't believe she gave him the signal. Like the marmalade sandwich, the reason that what's his name drinks from the crazy straw, all of those little things throughout this movie, they just work for me. Like they just work. The dialogue in this is so unrelenting, and it's exactly my sense of humor. That's the other thing. Like, I don't know if a movie with a sense of humor has ever been made more for a person than this movie was made for me, because that's how I and me and my friends are. Like, it is that very fast, whatever. It's all nonsense, but it's callback after callback after callback after callback. And like, my one friend went to the Peace Corps in Africa, and I always said that he was going in February. I said, you'll be back before March Madness starts. He was supposed to be there for 2 years. He was literally back before March Madness starts. And now all the time I'll be like, wow, like those 2 years when Eric was in Africa, like they just flew by. And like I do that to him all, but like it's just those constant callbacks and whatever it can be. And so this movie, like the way they all interact with each other, the way they all feel bad for Gary King, but at the same time, they don't really feel bad for Gary King. The way Gary King just constantly is giving it back and forth. And you have a selective memory. Somebody else was telling me about that. Yeah, it was me. No, I would have remembered that. Like those types of things. It's Leslie Nielsen, but it's Leslie Nielsen like with a cocaine energy, because that is this is just cocaine energy the entire movie. And it's so much fun. This movie for me is just endlessly watchable. I would say out of the movies on my list, Everybody Wants Some, Moonrise Kingdom, those are kind of like my endlessly watchable. They'll just put you in a good mood. Or Moonrise Kingdom doesn't actually put me in a good mood, but for most of the movie, it puts me in a good feeling. It's one of those movies that'll just kind of lift you up out of whatever situation you're in. And that's why I love this movie, because, you know, my favorite movie from this year, which we'll talk about next week, is Inside Llewyn Davis. And it has the exact opposite feel of what The World's End has, where it'll bring you down from any situation you're in, but it's powerful stuff.
No, absolutely. And these are the type of movies that we kind of overlook a lot of times too. These are the type of movies that, while they aren't as technically sound as some other movies that we have on our lists, the emotional impact of them is incredibly important.
Yeah, and that's my bigger thing. I mean, I'm not really a technical person. I'm big with writing. But, you know, if you put a Woody Allen like I do, I have Annie Hall in my top 100. There's nothing technical about Annie Hall. Annie Hall, like, you know, it is what it is, but it's a great movie. And yeah, there's certain movies like Tree of Life. That's a technically perfect movie. That's not really much about the writing. But I am much more into the writing aspect of it. If you can make me feel in some way, that's why I have Crash on my list. And I talked about that. Like when a movie can make you cry, it's doing something right in my estimation. But what's funny is if you ask people what are their favorite movie, what is your favorite movie? If you say that to most people, yours is Stalker, mine is The Deer Hunter. But depending on who you're talking to, you might change your answer. Not necessarily because like you feel differently, but because it's like, well, what is this person going to think of me, or whatever your situation is? There's probably so many people who would put one of the movies from the Cornetto trilogy in their top 10 movies of all time, but probably won't admit it unless they're sitting around with their like dude bro friends. And even in that situation, they might not say it because their dude bro friends are gonna be like, oh, that movie wasn't funny. I didn't like Shaun of the Dead. I liked blank. Like it's this trilogy is one of those things where it's like it's popcorn fun, but it's popcorn fun for like a movie audience. And I think that's what what makes Edgar Wright so appealing with all of the movies he's made. He's made like one bad movie, maybe two. I don't know what anybody feels about Run Fat Boy Run, but one, maybe two bad movies. And when you look at like his work as a whole, it's like, why does he work? Because he understands movies, but he also understands how to entertain you. And so while he's giving you these movies with serious depth and characters you can care about, he's also just making something where you don't want to look away the entire time. And it's unlike so much else that we're seeing in that genre of action, adventure, whatever you want to say, because he has his own distinct style that nobody in Hollywood has been able to replicate.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. I hope I didn't steal your thunder for when we get to your number 10, your number 7, your number 11. Like, I mean, you got him all over your top 100 list, right?
I do have quite a few of his movies in here.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's what I got for The World's End. I mean, I love this movie. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's one of those movies that I think is the most rewatchable of this trilogy. I think Shaun of the Dead kind of catches you off guard the first time you watch it, but I actually feel that Shaun of the Dead is the worst of the trilogy.
I agree.
Yeah, Shaun of the Dead for me, it's kind of one of those movies that was fun at the time and now it's a little dated. Hot Fuzz has so much working for it. That's a good one. It's got that kind of cocaine energy too. But The World's End for me, it just hits all of the right notes. And that's why I have him. That's why I have it right here at number 72, one spot behind Inside Llewyn Davis, which I pretty much at the time had said that they were a tie for each other. And then I went with Inside Llewyn Davis. So we'll see how I feel next week about which one is actually better, but they couldn't be more opposite. So if you're going to make your top 2 movies from a year, make them as opposite as possible. So it's impossible to pick which one's actually better, you know? All right, John. What else we got? We good? We moving on with our lives?
I think we're good. Let's wrap this up.
All right, cool. So next week we are going to, as I've said numerous times, Inside Llewyn Davis, and we're talking about The Two Towers, our second Lord of the Rings movie that we will be discussing, and the second movie that we both have on our list. So we're talking The Two Towers and Inside Llewyn Davis. Two Towers, the second movie we watched behind Return of the King. So we're doing our reverse Lord of the Rings watch. That should be fun, though. Kind of watch it separate because we watched Return of the King separate, and that was quite a viewing experience. So look forward to that one. Small Coen Brothers movie and a larger-than-life thing, and we get to watch Legolas slide down his shield down the stairs while he shoots arrows into people in probably the coolest shot in film history. So, yeah, that is what we have on deck. So, John, we actually start a pretty good run here of Two Towers. Oh, I screw it up because I have Alien higher on my list, but John's next 2 movies are Two Towers, Alien, and Empire Strikes Back, and then I have Jaws. So we were about to have 4 straight weeks of fun, but because I have Alien higher, we're going to watch Moon, which definitely is not in the same level.
Might be the opposite of fun.
Yeah, definitely not in the same level of fun of those movies, but good run coming up here. So thank you all for listening. Hope you're all enjoying. John, as always, a pleasure. Can't wait to watch some more obscure Russian stuff because that's just what you make people do.
The rest of it's really high up, so it is less obscure.
Okay, good. Not that I have a problem with any of the ones we've watched so far. It's just, I'm ready to not have to think so deeply about Russian history because I don't know it. All right. We'll see you next week, everybody.